All right, wanted to get into ideas around evolution, evolutionary theories, humanity, things along these lines. I don't know, maybe from your personal perspective, from an occult perspective, some of the different theories and thoughts, like generally, uh, most maybe common versions of modern Christianity would have the creation myths as they see them to be, with Adam being and Eve or created from his rib, whatever, propagating humans from there. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm just like, there, and then there's the ideas of evolution, and things evolved from like bacterias and into higher order life forms, and then those evolved into higher order life forms, and then eventually we got humans, and then there's this interesting diversity within the race of people and their different pronounced features, skin color, things like this. So I just wonder your personal take on the how humanity came into its modern form. Um, do you view it as something that was a long process of things gradually evolving and changing and adapting and coming into our modern form? Do you feel like there was actually some like kind of divine creative energetic influence on these things? Just yeah, any of that.
Well, I don't think anything can happen without divine influence, not even the existence of evil.
Good point.
So obviously, everything is a product of the divine.
I guess
Only God
including
is.
the evolutionary theory though, right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I believe in evolution. I mean, but there is a missing link. There's something there that is still unexplained, and strict reductionist materialist scientismists, because scientism has become a fucking religion. It has embodied the zeal that makes us blind the same way religion did. That's really what we're chasing our tails, pointing at things. It's the underlying thing which animates these institutions that we dislike and is harmful to us. And that's important when we talk about things like evolution. You have to understand that, like, you have to begin to think in essences. Fuck the material. Think of it like a blanket. Think of all material, all matter is like a blanket. That was Plotinus's thing, is that it's inert, it's dead, like that blanket. What animates it is, like, picture a hand moving under the blanket, and forming different kind of shapes and things like that. That's spirit, the divine, the soul, whatever you want to call it. So yes, of course, evolution can take place, right? Because the spirit is moving underneath the material. The anima mundi, the psyche cosmo, the soul of the world, the soul of the cosmos is generating this stuff. It's enlivening and organizing and reorganizing matter. So you have to begin to think that way in terms of parsing this evolution issue. Yes, we evolved. Yes, there is a fucking gigantic gap. And for people who are, strict evolutionists, to deny that gap and to deny, sort of like, to reject any plausible deniability, at least around that hole, is like, well, you're taking a leap of faith the same way the creationist is. You have you're yelling at each other over the same fucking flaw, except you just feel really smart. You feel really intelligent, and at the end of the day, you just, unfortunately, and I'll happily tell anyone this throughout the course of their lifetime, whether they're a fucking guru or a yogi, you're still human. Unfortunately, you're still human. And that's all we're going to get. That's as high as it goes in this lifetime. But you look around, you're like, God damn it, man. Are we not miraculous enough to have built these massive buildings, these cities, these systems, this computer I'm talking to you on, I mean, that's miraculous enough for me. Absolutely. But I do believe that evolution was a process by which spirit created human beings. There is definitely some sort of gap. You know, Arthur C. Clarke famously wrote about it and was adapted into Stanley Kubrick movie. Stanley Kubrick is my all-time favorite director. 2001 Space Odyssey, where that the black monolith comes and somehow like energetically radiates evolving these monkeys, and they still have the monkey trait in them, right? We still have weapons of war the same way we beat each other with bones in the opening of that movie, which is really important because it goes back to what we were talking about the lower and higher natures. Now, here is where I hear it. It's from some sort of media, either a TV show or a movie. But Miguel Connor, who I spoke to earlier today, he constantly puts this line in his podcast, and I love it because it's perfect. The human being is where the falling angel meets the rising ape.
I love that.
And that's the formula. That is when I came to my understanding about this stuff years ago. It was not just a reaching up. It was not just evolution, right? Because you need a dipole for magnetism to take place. It's like that famous painting by Michelangelo on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel, where God is reaching out towards Adam, and he's just kind of like, whatever. God's like, striving to him with all his might. There are choirs of angels, and he's reaching out in this like proto superhero pose, and Adam's just like, these grapes are cool though, but it requires that dipolar attraction. So the rising ape meets the falling angel, so to speak. It's a poetic way of putting it. That's what I believe. Anything scientific to explain that missing link, I don't know. Does it matter? I kind of have an understanding of both sides. Do I need anything else? So that's what I would submit for that. It's a good question. It's a very good question.
Yeah, it's just interesting. I think it's interesting too. Like because I more so lean towards the notion of things gradually over time evolving from very small life forms into our modern life form, but I still do think that's divine, and I do think that our this conscious spirit that we have is an evolved sort of consciousness in that sense, maybe. But because I feel like it's a toggle sort of, though, because it's consciousness evolves along with things materially and biologically, but at the same time within that there are these ebbs and flows and dips and rises in different pockets of humans and humanity. And even like nowadays we have very modern, quote unquote, spiritual intellectual societies and groupings, and then there's even in the Amazon forest is very primitive individuals, and their awareness is in a totally different sort of state. So I think that's interesting. And then also thinking about the idea of skin color, darker skinned people, I think theoretically a lot of people believe that it's because of their exposure to the sun in areas of the world. But for me, that just seems kind of hard to believe, but it's potential. I'm not dismissing it entirely. So I always wondered about the diversity of races and the interesting features that go along with different races and things like that. And if there's any interesting thoughts that you might have along those lines, or what do you think?
Well, I definitely think that the prototypical human consciousness was, I'll say this, was pre-physical. I believe that, right, there was an archetypal Adam. And that we, whether this is like a system or like an analogy, I don't need it. I don't need it to be one or the other. It could be, it's both. It's literally real and also symbolically real at the same time for me. there was an archetypal human being that existed, right? Because in the occult magical worldview doesn't say that consciousness is generated from the physical organ of the brain. As a matter of fact, modern science doesn't even say that. They say that consciousness is an emergent property. That's the academic verbiage, which is to say that we don't fucking know anything about it.
Mhm.
We can map it, but it's like there are difficult sort of things, because it's basically like if you were standing on top of a building that had like a glass roof, and you were shining a light down inside to let somebody know where you were, and then that person was shining a light at you, you could see vaguely where that light was hitting from below on the glass, but you couldn't pinpoint where exactly they were down there. And that's kind of the way, neurological mapping works. We can't really see. We can't really pinpoint. So we say, well, because even if we could, right, you're dissecting all these different parts of the mind, but how that doesn't explain how consciousness as a holistic unity is able to function and go to the fucking bathroom and talk on microphones and, make art and build houses. It doesn't explain that. And it can't, never will. But they say consciousness is an emergent property. It's very vague, not saying anything about it. Well, in the magical worldview, the brain is the physical housing of consciousness. There's a different kind of consciousness that resides in the heart. Science agrees with that, right? We have the SA node, which is its own electrical system. And there's even more, we go back to Plato's tripartite division of the soul. The appetitive resides in the gut, the belly. The spirited in the heart, the rational in the head. Those are the three. I don't know if I delineated them or if I got sidetracked earlier, but it's the appetitive, the spirited, and the rational. So I definitely believe that humanity as a whole was a unity, and part of the quote unquote fall is that unity's fragmentation into these individual that's why we're linked to the collective subconscious, that Akashic record, that group astral, because we really are one consciousness. That's kind of why whatever programming is happening to people right now is happening to all of us. Even if you live in the fucking woods like I do, and you don't watch TV, and you're doing all this other meditative stuff, you're still being affected. You're going to find that your behaviors are still sliding down the slope. You might be the last in the herd, but you cannot avoid. It's an irresistible gravity, an irresistible weight that's pulling you from a collective realm, because we truly are that unified, soul consciousness. But we appear fragmented here, but we have to behave that way. We cannot be, you have to live according to the laws of duality with unity in mind. That's the formula. But so in terms of different races, we get into hairy territory when we start reading like the theosophical stuff. She talks about the Helena Blavatsky and her quote unquote successors. We talk a lot about the 5 root races, the Lemurians, the Atlanteans, and this is all quote unquote channeled stuff. So it's like, should she have been writing about this? Probably the fuck not. This is when like spirituality can kind of inflate the ego to the point where like, the road to hell becomes paved with good intentions. This kind of stuff is for you, because it's not, you've got people now talking about like the Lemurians and stuff like that because it was channeled again, and like the raw material and all this stuff. It's like, you don't fucking know. We have no idea. And here's a better question. Does it matter? No. Let's suffice. It doesn't matter what you call them. You can call them the Muppets. Okay. But we know that there's some race of people, some big chunk of history that was removed and thrown away and not, hidden, completely occulted from us. We don't have to go into like whether or not these people could communicate telepathically or whether they destroyed themselves by a crystalline technology. It doesn't fucking mean anything, because at the end of the day, the thing that it doesn't matter, the physical essence of who they are, what they look like, what they did. It's the same faulty fucking interface, no matter what. If you do it with a gun, if you do it with crystals, if you do it with a nuclear bomb, you don't destroy the world because the nuclear bomb exists. You destroy the world because there's something fucking wrong with you. And that's usually, consistent. That's not, we're not dealing with any new problems. So, as far as pigmentation of the skin goes, I mean, yeah, I could get behind the idea that it had something to do with that, but there are other traits, like you're saying, that appear to be more than egregores. They say, right? Egregores are national. I believe in a group soul. And actually, this is something that is valid, I think, from those teachings, that those root races have group souls. And now we're not talking about black, white, African, indigenous, Native American, Asian. That's not what we're talking about necessarily. What we're talking about is epochs of people. And the group soul, they all come in together type of thing, in this epoch. So for a certain level of evolution, for a certain level of work, that I can kind of get behind. Again, both literally and symbolically. Right? I don't need it to be one or the other. Right? Linear thinking is, if anything, is what we're talking about. That root cause. It's the linear, like strictly rational linear thinking, that mechanistic, hyper rational thinking. That is the gateway to that whole problem that we keep seeing. You need a holism, and I think people were formerly inherently whole before. Here's an interesting thing, and I'll finish on this. According to like the writings of Pasquale and his treatise on the reintegration of being, and certain other things that I've read, there wasn't one fall. There are consecutive falls where we get further and further away from the divine, even in the material. That's happening right now. That's happening right now. Virtual reality will be a second fall. Postmodernism, umpteenth fall. Postmodernism is a fall. Scientific reductionism is a fall. We're getting further and further away from being able to perceive truth.
Definitely. Humans and their consciousness expansion, the field that they emanate, like morphic field or these psychic potent fields potentially. Do you think that there are individuals that can generate such a potent state of being or consciousness to where it can radiate out at a distance to a lot more so than other individuals? Can an individual develop themselves to be sort of a channel of a particular consciousness that then when other individuals are in the presence of them, it can sort of leak into or cross over and affect other individuals?
Yes, 110,000%. And that's the purpose of becoming a hierophant, right? If you're not a hierophant unless you're doing that, meeting you should be a species of initiation. Listening to you speak, reading something you wrote, looking at a piece of your art. If you're a hierophant in word and deed, it should be a species of alchemical initiation. I think some people are born with more of that field, as you put it, and I think that it's definitely possible to train it, so that you have a broader signal, further reach. It's a certain je ne sais quoi, though, like it's not. Again, I think the mystery schools are nets to catch people who have this talent, and hopefully develop it to the apex that it can be developed. I think Christ, I think, Gautama, Siddhartha, Buddha, I think, many prophets, teachers, sages have done exactly that. Because then otherwise, how is it Plato? Why is it that there's one fucking teacher that everybody gravitates around, and we're talking about this shit 1,000, 2,000, 2,500 years later? You know, because they allowed themselves to become channels, and they used their mundane sphere as sort of a broadcast tower. I'm a cell tower to broadcast the message I'm getting. And I'm using everything I've got. I'm using my talents, I'm using my weaknesses, I'm using the strong parts of my personality, but I'm not doing it consciously. All I'm doing is kind of, I guess Campbell would call it either following your bliss, or like, you know, as Christians call it, like, you know, letting God take the wheel. It's a very strange thing to try and kind of explain, because it's like you're here in this body, but you're speaking, information is pouring into you faster than you can speak it. And it's not coming from your brain. You're not, that's your consciousness is not doing that. Your consciousness is attempting to find words that can express these images, these feelings. You know, a lot of times you'll find that analogy is really strong with people who are like this, because I have to find a way to analogize what I'm seeing, because it's beyond words. I have to make an analogy because there's nothing I could tell you intellectually that will express this. And here again, you see, you know, spiritual teachers. Hold on, sorry.
No worries.
Some idiots peacocking down Broadway on a chopper. It's making a lot of noise.
Gotta love
it. But you see spiritual teachers a lot of the time, like, you know, the ultimate in our historical record, they talk comparables, right? It's the same thing, just analogies.
Do you think there's like humans out there that, you know, say maybe they live in like a mountain, some extreme high level advanced sort of consciousness and awareness, but maybe they're reclusive and unknown to the people around them. But do you think that it's a possibility that their state of being could have an effect on like a small population?
Well, that's the whole idea behind the quote unquote ascended masters, right? Of Blavatsky and of the Golden Dawn, Anna Kingsford, Sam Mathers. They all believed in these fucking adepts who were just the quintessential ascended master, because they were all being influenced by these ideas from the East, you know, from the Vedic traditions in India and Tibet and things like that. Were just starting to really come through again into the West. And there's this conception of, you know, even like the 7 Taoist immortals who walk away from the world, you know, heartsick at its ways, to go live on mountaintops. I would say that if there are people that do that, because it is a trope, that they're not doing a fucking great job. So unless they're dark adepts, then they're doing chefs. But I'm not certain that there are people who can sway an entire population just by sitting in a room alone. I think that there is an occult law in operation in the workings, the mechanism of the physical universe, the wheel work, if you want to call it that requires you to do some physical act. That's the rationale, as I was saying earlier, behind ritual. Yeah, you can do plenty of things with your mind, but it's not going to be as good. It's not going to be as permanent, as effective as if you do something material, even if it's just a knock. So what it'd be. You know what I'm saying? That there has to be something with physical intentionality behind it. A word could do it, but large groups of population, I'm not sure. There are other ways to influence people. You know, maybe like a small town or something like that. And it's easier. So this is one of the things that's brilliant about the Star Wars trilogy, the original trilogy, when Luke is training. And I say this all the time to people, I'm gonna write a fucking book on it. And if you take my idea, I will curse you. No, I'm kidding. But everything that I needed to know about spirituality comes out of the mouth of a little green puppet named Yoda. Everything. The further along I get, the more I realize, like, oh my God, they put everything into Yoda, everything. So he says, Luke asks him, is the dark side more powerful? And he says, no, easier, more seductive. And that's using a kind of dark manipulative energy will more easily influence people. You know, that kind of whole Frankenstein's monster thing, you know, where it's like the town is like uneasy and ominous feeling, and that's how witch hunts and things like that. So if you're able to generate, and it's typically a quicker, stronger at first whirlpool or vortex, chakra, galgal, whatever language you want to use, but this spinning wheel of energy, to essentially build an egregore. But at a certain point, it's going to do its own thing. It'll be characterized with whatever intentionality you put into it, right? Because if it's fear and it makes people scared, that's only going to snowball. So in that way, I could see how a relatively small population could be affected. But I think that there has to be some kind of physicality to it, even if it's minute.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I don't know if it's people or constellations in relation to positions of the Earth, energies of geographical locations. I know that we talked a little bit about this sort of thing in a podcast we did with Mark, but it's definitely seems like in certain areas there's just a different quality to the air and the consciousness. And you know, I've got a lot of friends that I've made in New Mexico, and a lot of people that I've talked to in New Mexico, in certain parts of New Mexico, doing podcasts with them or just learning and listening to their different stories. And it just seems like there's definitely a whirlpool or a vortex of some kind that is very distinct and stands out among a lot of other locations that, and maybe it just be my sphere of awareness, but it's like there's something there that has this particular quality to it that it's almost like the veil is a little bit thinner, or I don't know what it is or what to make of it, but that's kind of like one of the things that I was thinking about when I was asking you these questions. It just kind of, it's fascinating to me.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that, but I'm sitting right now as we speak in Asheville, where there people believe there to be vortices all over this fucking place. And you know, in a couple of weeks, as you know, I'm coming out there and we're going to Sedona, where there's apparently a vortex.
I love
And
Sedona.
there's definitely something, you know, yeah, I love talking about it with Mark Steves on that tripod that we did. There is definitely some kind of terrestrial meridian, or you know, a terrestrial acupoint, right? That's what we call it, chakras, terrestrial chakra. It just means wheel. Galgal is the Hebrew term for that spinning vortex. But the thing is, it's a little bit of both, right? It definitely, I think, is affected by the astrology, or is at least more sensitive to whatever's happening in a certain area based on a planetary correspondence or some sort of constellation or what have you. But it also is kind of in this feedback loop with people. So for instance, there's a big vortex here. The type of lifestyle and person that it gravitates towards a place like Asheville historically has been someone who is healing, someone who is in need of healing or is on a healing trajectory. For instance, this town was built up by the Vanderbilts. As a lot of people here know that. The reason why they found it is because it was home to this physician named Dr. Batol. I believe it's spelled Batol or Battol, something to that effect. And he was somebody that people would see for pneumatic issues. And so I believe it was George Vanderbilt. I forget. Cornelius' son, but his mother had issues with breathing, and you know, pneumatic issues. So they brought her here to this specialist, and she fully recovered, and she loved living in these mountains. And they built a whole, they built a castle here, the Biltmore, and then they built a little slave town for their workers. But Biltmore Village. Ever since then, this is a place where bodywork therapy, energetic bodywork like Reiki, Qigong therapy, acupuncture is huge here. It's a place where people aren't just bohemian, they're spiritual, and they come here and practice all these different healing modalities. And consequently, it attracts people that are in need of healing. Like they come here to heal. Same as me, right? I mean, I came here just like when I really started. I mean, I was struggling in my recovery journey, even still when I got here. And I came here to heal as well and to learn things. I didn't know that was part of my intentionality, but I was brought here, and it has continued this trajectory. And not only that, but I'm someone who can heal, right? I was like, not to pat myself on the back. It's just the truth. I was very, very naturally disposed to something like Reiki and energy work. I can feel it. I can see it. I can move it. I can teach other people how to do that. And so I very quickly picked up Reiki. I went into massage and body work, Qigong therapy, did that regularly, and then acupuncture, Qi theory, meridian theory, all that stuff. And I ended up here against all odds. I mean, if I told you the story, it's just kind of like, how the hell did that happen? Also, I had no idea when I was thinking about Asheville. I reached out to Tabby and I said, hey, I might be moving to North Carolina. Is there a Golden Dawn temple down there? I'm pretty sure there is. I'm going to be in Asheville. Where are they? And she said, well, they're in Asheville. So it's these synchronicities. They draw us here. We're drawn here by these energies when they're powerful. So I don't think it's just one or the other. It's the combination of everything, because that essentially the type of people that are drawn there are going to affect the group egregore. It's not always like people want to think about this healing haven in the mountains. Like, this place is a fucking nightmare because there's a bunch of sick, damaged fucking people like walking around a mental ward, like trying not to bump into each other and lose their shit. So it's there's definitely a downside to broken, fragile people. And another issue is that you get stuck in these. It's like the healing modality becomes an end in itself instead of a means to an end. So it's almost like being a dry drunk. I don't drink anymore, but my behaviors are still the same. I'm still leaning on things. I'm still not replacing old habits with good habits. I'm still, using something, whether it's cigarettes or food as an addiction, and not doing the steps and all that stuff. And it's kind of the same thing here. Like people will go and stretch and do Bikram yoga and go to the salt caverns and do acupuncture, and then like freak out on you, like online at Whole Foods, for like not giving them their 7-inch bubble. You're in my space. It's just kind of like those people are like fucking fragile. So it's not like healing is dirty. It's down. It's rough. So that's kind of what my experience of Asheville has been a lot of people who are in the process of healing that don't necessarily look forward to a day when they are healed, but have come to espouse a lifestyle in which they remain perpetually broken, but are constantly seeking the healing.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. I love that stuff. All right. This is somebody that I don't know very much about, but I've heard the name often. Nostradamus. I was in the kind of like metaphysical book section at the bookstore a couple weeks ago, and there's just tons, like a whole shelf almost full of Nostradamus books. And so there's obviously a lot to this guy. I just thought it would be interesting. I don't know if you have any interesting takes or thoughts in regards to Nostradamus. I believe he was a prophet of some sort. But yeah, I wanted to ask you about him.
I guess he's one of those guys that, like, when you first start like turning your, so you grow up in this Western historic paradigm and you're taught about certain things, and then like you'll kind of hear about Nostradamus in like a dark corner and not much is said about him. And then maybe you'll go to like the clearance section in Barnes and Noble, and of course there's a book that's been marked down from $30 to like $4 with the prophecies of Nostradamus. And so that was kind of my entree to him. I did read sort of like transcriptions and descriptions of his prophecies, the whole thing with like he predicted Hitler, but he called him Hister and all that stuff. I don't really know about any potential occult training with Nostradamus. And I'm not, like him and Edgar Cayce, they fascinated me. The idea of prophecy fascinated me, but it's like, there's not much. Like I am an observer to that kind of behavior. There's nothing there within their, like I look at Nostradamus and I want to know more about how he did it, and there's nothing to tell me. Edgar Cayce, he said anybody can do this. I mean, he discovered his powers by laying down after like yard work or something like that. And he thought he fell asleep on his couch, but he went into trance. And that was his method for the rest of his life, was to lay down on the couch. And he had sitting American presidents come and visit him, and he would lay down on his couch and tell them, what was up, what was going to happen. He'd go into trance, and he'd have that stuff transcribed for him by like a secretary or maybe his wife. I can't really remember, because he wouldn't remember any of it. Nostradamus, we have his prophecies, and I remember at the time, more things could have been written about him since then, but I kind of lost interest. But at the time, I wasn't really, there was his prophecies, and then I didn't know anything about it. Now it's kind of like, you understand that he was an apothecary, right? So he was practicing, some sort of herbal preparation, perhaps derivative of Galenic medicine, perhaps derivative of Paracelsian spagyria, perhaps a derivative of, who knows, something going on in those continental European traditions of herbal folk healing. But he was an astrologer as well, and that's a kind of divination as well. Astrological prophecy, really divination. Prophecy and divination are different, but he also held the prophetic, and they're different because they work on different parts of the psychic organism. But he did also have that gift of prophecy, where he would, I don't know what his methods were. Was he scrying? Was it trance-based? I'm not certain. But a lot of it is pretty fascinating. But I think my interest lies more in like, okay, how do I do that?
Mm-hmm.
Not for the world, not for everybody. How do I work on being able to do that? Because I view that as a kind of spiritual evolution. I view that as a kind of spiritual psychic development. I would not pursue that as the end. I don't want to just be able to like sit here with a fucking turban on and tell you what your future is going to do. It's just, who wants to be stuck in that, right? Because a lot of times you're delivering bad news. But I wanted to see, I think he's a good entry point for people who deep down know something else exists, but don't know kind of, how to approach it. A lot of mundane history portrays, they take the most convincing people like Anton Mesmer and people like Rudolf Steiner. They take the most convincing examples of that stuff and they fucking throw them in the garbage. You never hear about it. Mm-hmm. You never learn about the massive impact these people have had on all of Western history, because they did. And you don't hear about it. So you've got Nostradamus, who's a nice kind of like entry point, I think. But again, Mesmer had a method. He taught lots of people how to do that. He was, he was a celebrity. He was a living legend. He created the idea of animal magnetism. He created what we understand to be hypnotism. He like, nobody knows. He's become, his name is incorporated into our lexicon. I was mesmerized.
Yeah.
You don't know who the fuck he is, and that's because he gave a method. So they threw it the fuck out. They don't want you doing that shit. But I spent a lot of time studying this. There are still colleges. Some of his stuff is kind of like retained in polarity therapy, which is really cool. But I think like people like Nostradamus were, I mean, look, somebody could be listening to this right now and be like, no, there's like lots of stuff other than his quatrains. He knew, forgive me, mea culpa. I spend more of my time researching other things, but I think my initial kind of like being like having to put that down was because like, okay, I want to do this now. That's the difference between most magicians and other people. It's like I want to do this too.
Definitely. All right. Well, I gotta pee real quick, and I'll be right back.
Okay.
All right, back. Okay. So I wanted to ask you about the Kabbalah and the tarot, and I've seen some like images here and there of like tarot cards corresponding to like specific paths on the tree. And I was just curious to ask you about that, why that is, and what could be understood from this, and how the Kabbalistic paths may relate to the tarot.
Yeah, that's a good question. So that is obviously the Hermetic Kabbalah and the Hermetic Tarot. These correspondences really began to be played with by Antoine de Courtegavelon and Atelier, who was, I think his name was Joseph Aliette. He went under a pen name that was his last name backwards, however it was. You start to see this Hermetic attribution to the tarot cards, Triomphe, during the 1700s by a couple of French guys. And it was Court de Gebelin who kind of intuited that first. He claims that it's an insight that he received, as soon as he laid eyes upon this thing, he kind of intuited that it was a vestige of Egyptian kind of knowledge that got transferred over. But it ends up getting placed onto the Tree of Life really firmly, seriously by the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn and their work with within the Hermetic Kabbalah and Hermetic Tarot in order to systematize a holistic system of really path working the Tree of Life. You have the Sephiroth, which are the sort of passive elements. They are the essential underpinnings, I guess the maybe unconscious dream material of God. And then you have the Navitat, which are the paths, and those connect the Sephiroth, right? So they're going to be a blend of those two experiences, or of those two essences that are going to culminate in a specific experience. That's the whole thing about the paths. They're experiential, whereas the Sephiroth are archetypal. They're identified, the paths are identified with the trump cards, and therefore that's why they work in a reading to be able to tell you what kind of experience, what kind of energies you're going to encounter. But some people can say it's arbitrary. I happen to think that anything that you do on the astral should have some kind of structure to it, some kind of order, because there's so much that can go wrong. It's the Wild West. It is an uncharted frontier. So and it has no inherent organization. You organize it yourself. The thing is that it's certain things or realms can be perceived, even though they are non-physical. They can take shapes in the human mind. This is what I love about David Chaim Smith. He says what he does is sort of esoteric cartography, which is a very interesting concept to me. And the thing is, there is this kind of archetypal universal quality to his drawings, his renderings, his maps. But again, he's also using a symbol system to interpret that, right? Because he says this is not what I'm actually seeing. I'm trying to interpret the things that I'm intuiting or encountering. And it's the same thing with the Tree of Life. You're using a symbolic, holistic alphabet so that you have reliable information that you can glean from this stuff. You know, a lot of path working and scrying is like, yes, they're transformative, but a lot of it at like higher levels is almost like information scouting, right? It's almost like an expedition to find some truth, some information about this object, thing, experience, archetype, a quadrant of unseen reality. And so you're going to have, you have a lot of unconscious material, which is, you know, you could have some fucking affinity to Sesame Street and all of a sudden Big Bird's in the middle of your path working. And it's like, oh, wait, it's wonderful to see you, but what are you doing here? And so that's going to obscure your ability to make sense of that information because the image is personal to you, right? And one of the things that Freud insisted, which I think is bullshit, but he's mostly right, at least for the uninitiated person, he says that the interpretation of the dream cannot happen by the dreamer. You're too close, you're too in it. There are things surrounding this image that you cannot admit to yourself. Your conscious mind can't handle it. So outsource those images to a reliable symbolic alphabet, and they will work every time for you, but you have to entrain them. As part of the process of the Outer Order of the Golden Dawn is training the vocabulary into your psyche so that it is first nature.
Yeah. Badass. All right. Time travel and magic. Have you ever come across any compelling examples of intentional time travel in any magical circles or with particular individuals, or anything that you've heard of? Is this like a thing? People say that this is
Yeah,
real?
absolutely. There's past life regression exercises that you're given at a stage in the Golden Dawn. There's remote viewing, astral travel. You know, even in Reiki circles, there's things like distance healing to the past. This was a big thing also around like early 20th century occultists like Dion Fortune and things like that. Send healing energy to this place, that point in time, etc. But the thing for me is that I don't, time only exists in the material realm, and it doesn't exist in the way in which so time is, we think of time as really concrete because we put a fucking clock on the wall. It means shit, it means dick. It's telling me where the sun is. Okay, that's not time. The thing is with time, it's this bracket term that we use to be able to make sense of change, right? That's the apparent necessity of time is in the fact that I was over there, now I'm over here. I used to look like this, I now look like this. So that is more a phenomenon of that's why time and space are linked. If there's no space, there can't be any time because there can't be any change. But these are largely like really abstract constructs and concepts that don't behave the way we think they do. We've organized them for practical use, but at the end of the day, you can't move backwards or forward in time. As a unit of measurement, right, which is change, it's a unit of measurement for change. As a unit of measurement, it's an anomaly because I can take my tape measure and I can pull it out further, or I can pull it back less. You can't do that with time. You can only be where the fuck you are. Okay, so even if you're like, well, I'm in the future now. No, you're not. It's your mind remembering that there even was a past, but you're always here. You're always in the ever-present now. So linear time, there's no such thing as linear time. Time doesn't fucking exist. I got news for you. But the thing is, consciousness does. And consciousness is the repository of all timelines, of all happenings, of all change. We refer to the collective unconscious as, and even the personal unconscious, which is our doorway to the collective unconscious, the Akashic realm. It's this little tape recorder in a dark room, and all it does is it's just on play all the time. It's recording everything that happens ever. And there's a collective, and there's even, like a world soul version of this. But so if time travel is happening, what you'll notice is that they're not really changing anything. A lot of times people will go into like what's called sort of like a resonance or an echo, and this is true of like certain like, I don't want to say poltergeist, but like haunting phenomenons where like at a certain time of night every year, it's like this, and this is true. I forget where it is. It might be like Bath, England, but there's a certain spot where like you can hear the footsteps of like the Roman legion walking through the town, but there's no variation. It's like this echo, this astral echo, this or etheric echo. And I think a lot of times we are peering into the echo, the astral echo of the past by tapping into the larger pool of consciousness that witnesses everything. One of the most, and I was talking about this with Miguel Connor about how like for a long time I took a break from reading nonfiction, and it was in starting to read fiction, particularly science fiction, that my mind was blown open. So things like the Valis trilogy, I learned about Gnosticism and kind of like this weird cyclical nature of time. But in the Slaughterhouse-Five by Kurt Vonnegut, he talks about these alien beings, and they can read time like a book because time's non-linear to them. We experience it as linear, and they don't understand that. But really, everything that has ever happened or ever will happen is happening now.
I love it. Sweet. Okay. Dion Fortune. I'll read a quote by her that I thought was cool. The green ray is essentially the ray of the artist, for it is the subconscious or astral mind which is the creative factor in the arts. And according to the propagation of this mentation, which prevails in the degree of inspiration. Technique is of the conscious human mind, but the true creative artistic impulse is of the ancient astral mind of the race which lies hidden below the threshold of the superimposed consciousness. I thought that was cool. So I just want to read that. So maybe give a brief background on her and then maybe elaborate on maybe some of what you think are some of the highlights of her work or things that you find particularly interesting.
I would love to eventually do a full episode on her because there's so much. But Dion Fortune is one of my teachers from beyond the grave. That's how that's not me saying like I'm in touch with her. No, I'm just saying from reading her works, there's definitely been some kind of, I don't know, interchange. She's blown my mind wide open. It's like I had waited my whole lifetime to read her books. And it's primarily the fiction. It's the fiction. And she says it herself. She says the theory is in her theoretical books, obviously, but the working out, the practical work of how it works is in her fiction. And there's a way to read her fiction corresponding to the Sephiroth of the middle pillar of the tree of life. And I did this, and I read, I think, 21 of her books in like 2 or 3 years. And she's one of the most gifted. Obviously, some of her opinions and things like that were influenced by the mores of her time. We got to forgive people that, right? Because God knows how we're going to fucking look in 100 years. We think what we do right now is okay, but in 100 years, it might not be the case. So there's something to learn from everybody, most especially for Dion Fortune. So actually, I got the chance to go over to Glastonbury and Glastonbury Tor and visit the Chalice Well Gardens and her old house there at the bottom of the hill. And I visited her grave and I wept. And I had no idea that was going to happen. I just became overwhelmed. And I felt like, she had given me so much and I had nothing to give her. So I had this ring, this Knight Templar ring, and I just took it off and I buried it right there, like maybe 6 inches deep, right next to her headstone. So that's how much of a fan I am of Dion Fortune. But she got involved in occultism fairly early. She was initiated into the order Alpha et Omega. That was, I believe, I believe she was, she definitely in the Alpha et Omega, because what happened was she butted heads with Moyna Mathers. So Moyna Mathers and Sam Mathers, obviously Sam Mathers, one of the 3 founding members of the Golden Dawn, Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, with Wynne Westcott and William Robert Woodman in London. His wife was the first kind of guinea pig of everything. She was also the visionary, intuitive sort of genius of the group. So there was a split around the early 1900s. The 2 of them, the Matherses, moved to Paris. They, the adepts of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn in London kept that name, and then eventually started over under the Stella Matutina under Robert Falcon, who is another one of those adepts. And that's kind of how the Golden Dawn proliferated through time, was through the Stella Matutina. That's the lineage that Israel regularly went through. But the Alpha et Omega was the brand of Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that the Mathers took with them to France. Paris, namely. Dion Fortune, whose real name was Violet Marie Firth. She took the name of her family coat of arms. They had a motto, Deo non fortuna, meaning God, not fate, which I love. I get chills every time I even say that. But so she was initiated. She channeled this thing. It was very theosophical, very kind of like proto-scientific, pseudo-scientific, right? Because at that time there were all these different intellectual movements, scientism. There was a reemergence of Hermetism. There was the inklings of what would become New Thought, Theosophy, all vying for the public discourse, and very clear, right? It's fin de siècle, end of the era. Late 1800s, continental Europe. Everybody can sense that orders of magnitude of change is about to happen, and they all want to be a part of it and influence it. So there are all these different vernaculars, and we look back at a lot of the theosophical writing and just roll our fucking eyes. They're trying to shoehorn this it was new at the time, this newly formed scientific jargon into spirituality, and some of it's just not, it's never going to be consonant with each other. But so Dion Fortune channeled, quote unquote, this work that was released later in life. I'm pretty sure it was posthumously, I'm not certain, but it's called the Cosmic Doctrine. And it was her sort of channeled version of the mechanism of all physical creation. But she used a lot of those scientific or non-scientific buzzwords at the time, along with, interpolations of like ancient Greek Neoplatonic words and things like that, like logoi and things like this. And so it was a real hodgepodge, and she brought it to Moyna Mathers, and she said, what do you think? And Moyna Mathers said, get this out of my face. And so from then on, they kind of had this adversarial relationship. Dion Fortune went on to claim that Moyna Mathers like psychically attacked her in a night, but it ended up that she went off and did her own thing. She started the Servants of the Inner Light, or I think actually it was Fraternity of the Inner Light when she started it up. She took Golden Dawn teachings and kind of applied them to this Arthurian thing. So what we've got in our current discussion, believe it or not, is this constant, and this has become true the more that we've done this, you and I. There are through lines here that are unintentional. But she believed in that whole root race theory. And one of the things that she said is that a practitioner should identify their ethnic heritage and then move to that place to do that work. And if that is impracticable, then do that work elsewhere in a place that is similar to it. So if you're of this kind of Norse German lineage, move to that location and practice those rites. That was her thing. And, she conceptualized these to be rays as well, that is straight out of Theosophy. So she moved to Glastonbury, which was what, lore dictated that Glastonbury is the former Avalon, where King Arthur was buried, right? And and so she connected with her roots there, started the Fraternity of the Inner Light, and she trained people like Butler and shit, I forget his name, not Kenneth Grant.
And when you say Butler, is that Butler Yeats?
No, William Butler Yeats was an original member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. I'm talking about W.E. Butler. I don't know like his full name. I think it's like something Ernest Butler. And then it was her most famous student, and it's just escaping me right now because I've been doing podcasts for 4 hours. I forget his name, but he co-authored The Circuit of Force with her. Essentially, he took his Gareth Knight. Gareth Knight. I'm thinking Kenneth Grant, right? KG.
Yeah.
I know that wasn't him. It's GK. Gareth Knight, and that's another pseudonym. That wasn't his real name. I think his name was like Basil or something like that. But he was like one of her premier students. He took over the servant or fraternity of the inner light. I think it became Society of the Inner Light at a certain point. Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki is cut from that tradition as well. There was a strong emphasis on psychic work, on path working, on connecting with the Grail mythos, Arthurian. And you see that to this day in Gareth Knight's work. But here's what I want to say about Dion Fortune. First of all, the Mystical Qabalah, that's a must fucking read, and a must read 4 or 5 times. And that's a minimum. Every time I read it, I learn something new. Every time. It's a lot of why I'm so able to understand this is because all this stuff, like everything I've been talking to everyone about for 7, 8 months now, is because I am so familiar with Dion Fortune's work, particularly the Mystical Qabalah. And she wrote a series of essays that she called the Circuit of Force. Her Society of the Inner Light had a publication, a sort of inner circulation newspaper, a newsletter. And she wrote a series of essays about this thing called the Circuit of Force. And we can go into this because this is a 3-hour conversation at minimum. We can go into this in another spot, but Gareth Knight collected all these works and published them with his, I think, appendices and his introduction. And he entitled it The Circuit of Force. For occultists within the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, Hermetic Kabbalistic initiation, this is not only a must read, but if you read it enough, and if you practice what is said, and if you really ruminate on this, it is the key. It is the key to magic. And that's called the Circuit of Force. You may read it, you may come away from it and say, like, I have no idea, I'm none the wiser. You must keep going, and you have to synthesize that knowledge, and you should practice a lot of it. But it's going to particularly affect people who are in the traditions that she came up in: Hermetic Order, the Golden Dawn, all the splinter orders, derivative orders, things like that. So that's what I want to say topically about Dion Fortune, although there is so much more that we could talk about.
Awesome. Well, how are you on time? If you got a jam, we can always jump back on at another time.
I got about another 15 if you want to ask another question. I feel like I'm flying through answers right now.
It's all good.
Going
All right, I'll ask you one more. Thoughts on contacting the dead. So say years.
Don't do it.
Don't do it. So I was thinking about this. I was thinking, say like years after an individual has passed, something like this, if they're dead and contact is allegedly made, would that not imply that reincarnation has not occurred on behalf of their soul? And if contact appears to occur, then what is that something that someone is coming into contact with? Or, because obviously, or maybe not obviously, but I would assume not all souls do reincarnate if they are at a certain level, perhaps, but most probably do. If you're contacting the dead of somebody that most likely had reincarnated years from now, and you're thinking that you're in contact with them, if their soul's reincarnated, then it's like, what are you really contacting them? Or, you know what I mean?
Yeah. So for this, I like to use a Kabbalistic model, but also I want to talk about something Egyptian. The first thing that you got to understand about contacting the dead is that 9 times out of 10, what you're contacting is a husk. It's the like we were talking before about astral echoes. It's the residual etheric material of what we call in the Kabbalistic organization of the Partsufim, or the parts of the soul, the Ruach. You are reaching the lower parts of the human personality that have been left behind as a husk, and by force of their own gravity have not dissipated. Now, the thing is, there is an astral and there's an etheric component, because those are the lower planes, and there are also, well, etheric is physical, but it's the highest level of physicality. It's very rarefied. It's the auric energy, the stuff you can see and feel, the chi, if you want to put it that way. The Egyptians called this the Ka. Okay, I wrote about this in an essay in Tombs Antorum, Volume 5, called The Illustrious Dead. If anybody wants to check that out, you can get that on Amazon. Sean Woodward's the editor. I don't get a penny of that, so I'm not trying to sell you books. It's just a good article. But the thing is, so you're making contact with the lower constituents of what was once a holistic organism. Essentially, what happens is the Malkuth aspect dies. It dissipates. The parts that are low, but, or I should say higher than the physical body, the Asiatic component, they retract. Thereby, the physical death of the body. It is now subject to decay. It's no longer animated by the same spiritual hierarchies. So that pulls out. But then what you have at a higher level, corresponding to to Bina on that tree, is that, right? That's beyond the abyss. That's the neshama. That's the soul. That's the essentiality of that person's being. Then corresponding to Chokmah, that is the Hia, the life, the true will, as Thelemites and Crowleans would conceive of it on the Kabbalistic tree of life. And then Kether is the Yehida. That's the essentiality. That is contact with your higher divine genius. That is where it resides, and it is bornless. Hence the bornless ritual to come in contact with the higher divine genius. I hesitate to call it the holy guardian angel. The holy guardian angel is based on the Fravashi of Zoroastrian myth, and it implies that this being is exterior to you. Now, Proclus tells us that the daimon in the Greek conception, because a lot of people think, well, oh no, it's derivative of the daimon. But Proclus tells us that the daimon can be viewed as exterior and interior. So we're conceiving of, and it may be that we're talking about the same thing. It is the diamond, but when you talk about the holy guardian angel, you're exteriorizing it. And when you talk about the higher divine genius, which is really where Crowley got the idea, right? He learned the Golden Dawn before Mathers published the Abramelin ritual. Mathers was publishing it as Crowley came under his wing, and he was likely learning all about the holy guardian angel from Mathers as he was struggling to publish this book, which, by the way, was the beginning of the end for the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So, so that in the Yekida, the bornless part of your spiritual archetype, and we keep going up. That's not just one tree. There's lots of trees, but this spiritual aspects sort of retract and leave pieces behind, right? So the Ruach moves away from the physical body, which we call the Guf. And then the Nefesh is the etheric energy, which is tied to the Guf. So the Guf is your physical matter, your meat. And the Nefesh is your etheric energy. So the species of the etheric energy and the Ruach are left. There's an old saying that says, just because they're dead doesn't mean they're any wiser. But people, and then further from the Ruach gets left behind, and then the Neshama comes out of that. And then up, now we're beyond the abyss, right? The soul, the life, the Yehida, the essentiality, the higher divine genius, the bornless parts, they're doing their own thing at the highest, most rarefied levels. Plato said you had to wait a minimum of 1,000 years to be reborn, which is crazy. But it's that part of you that gets reborn. When Pete dies, Pete's dead. Now, the thing is, you can make contact with these astral and etheric husks. But the issue is, they're either echoes, and if they pretend to know things, 9 times out of 10, they've been inhabited by an astral or etheric parasite. And herein lies the problem with necromancy. You have no fucking clue what is wearing that thing as a costume. Uncle John could literally be, an etheric costume for something that sees a vulnerability, sees a willingness for you to listen and enact their will on the material plane, because you think it's your fucking uncle. You think you've made, right? And we're so vulnerable, we're so hopeful to make that connection when people have died. But in reality, it's a husk.
Epic. All right. Well, let's end it on that. This was awesome. Always a pleasure. I'll just give the listeners a little look of this sick shirt that we've got going on here. Very
Beauteous.
excited about it. Thank you, anybody who has purchased one and supported us. Thank you, all the Patreon listeners, for supporting us. Greatly appreciated, as always. And we're going to continue to keep pumping out good stuff. And so, with that, until next time.
Hey, you know what I want to mention? One thing
What?
briefly. Again, I've got sirens. This is killing me. Um, I want to let everybody on the Patreon specifically know that myself, Sky, Jake Trayer, Jamie Polan, possibly Pat Shanahan from Tria Prima, we're doing a tripod. Tree Arcana Minds is going to happen in Phoenix, Arizona, next or on Tuesday the 19th, and then we'll be putting it out on everybody's channel. We're going to blast this out there. But I figured that I would tease our Patreon supporters because of how awesome and excellent they are, that we're going to all be meeting in the flesh for the first time. It's going to be excellent.
Can't wait. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that. I'm so stoked. That's going to be a blast.
Yeah. So thanks, Sky. Man, I love podcasting with you, and I've missed this. And I'm going to make a list of things that I really want to know your thoughts on, and we'll do. I'd really like to do I'd like to do a Sky Speaks, kind of podcast. And because there's a lot of shit that you know about alchemy that I don't know anything about. And I'd like
fun.
to talk about that with you.
Hell yeah. All right. Things to look forward to. All right, brother. Until next time.
All right.